Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Mary-Caitlyn Valentinsson. She graduated from the University of Arizona with a PhD in anthropology and linguistics, as well as a master's in linguistics. She is currently a manager of ethnographic research for Universal Destinations and Experiences based in Orlando, Florida. How are you doing today, Mary-Caitlyn?
I'm doing fabulous. It's great to talk to you.
Yes, you as well. So what is it that you do, and how does anthropology play a role in it?
Oh, the $1,000,000 question. It's funny because I remember when I was being interviewed for this role, one of the main questions that kept coming up for me was, well, what am I going to do every day? And nobody could really answer that question, partly because the role was brand new to the organization. And so the person coming in sort of had to define it, but also because the work of the role is, like it says in the job title, it's to do ethnographic research, which any anthropologist knows encompasses a range of different methods. You've got to follow the breadcrumbs. It can take you to totally unexpected places. So I do a lot of different things. But at the core of it all, in my job at Universal, is using ethnographic research, using the foundational tools of anthropology, but we pull in stuff from all kinds of social sciences to really understand from a holistic experience what it's like for guests in our theme parks. And that's just one part of our research arm, right? We have a very incredible quantitative team, and they kind of design and program and analyze the results from quite sophisticated surveys. A lot of folks there are trained in, psychology and market research, and they bring all that background to bear on the work. But surveys, quantitative work, it's only one way of exploring a topic or getting at a problem, right? There are some things that are better suited to that. And some things you really need a pair of human eyes, a pair of human ears, observing and listening to what's going on. So to that effect, we do things like interviews, focus groups, structured observations out in the park, anything that would be properly within the toolkit of an anthropologist that an anthropologist might use at their field site to start exploring a problem. That's what we do. We do it in theme parks. And we also, use it to study the sort of travel, leisure, tourism industry, because we know people's lives don't start and end in our theme parks. And so we kind of want to understand the whole system and the whole space around that, so that when we do report to our leaders about here's what the guest experience is, they have a ton of context to make decisions to help the guest experience get better and extremely awesome and thrilling and exciting and all the things you want out of the theme park.
Yeah. So what exactly is a structured observation? What does that look like?
So, sure. Yeah. So a lot of times when anthropologists are conducting research in the field, there might be a stage where you're just kind of hanging back and observing and getting a sense of what are the typical behavioral or social or interactional patterns that are going on. But sometimes there's a specific behavior you really want to understand in a targeted fashion. And so instead of just, hanging out there vibing and having a broad eye to the entire context, you're focused on something more specific. So for instance, you might want to keep a record or a tally of how many times in an hour visitors to this theme park pressed a certain button on an interactive exhibit. How many times did that happen? So that's something that might fall under that umbrella of structured observations. And there might be more specific things that go into that, right? Maybe you're keeping track of, are the people that are pressing this button, maybe 100 people in an hour, are those all grown-ups? Are those families with kids? If they've got kids with them, are the kids doing something different? So depending on what your research questions are, you might break that down into sort of logging and recording, kind of the more finer grained details of a given behavior. But it really just means kind of zooming in and being more focused about how you record the stuff that you're seeing happen and, doing that in a structured way. Maybe you want to explore how appealing that button is, over the course of a day. So maybe you do an hour of observation in the morning and another hour in the afternoon and another hour in the evening. Or maybe you have a hypothesis that button is, the interactive button is only appealing during the Christmas holidays. So maybe you do some observations through the month of November and others in December and others in January, right? So there's all kinds of ways to approach that. But as I say, at the core, it's a sort of sub-tool of participant observation, maybe doing less participating yourself and more making sure you're observing things in that kind of structured, systematic way so you can kind of pull up patterns and consistencies or inconsistencies.
So, when you guys are doing these observations or user experience research, are you ever working with the individuals who are, let's say, creating like the mapping of how the lines go and when they go behind into different rooms and you thought you were going to be on the ride, but it's a whole new room of lines?
Oh, yeah.
Do you work with those kind of individuals?
We work with people all across the organization. So yeah, there's ways in which our work interfaces with the kind of creative teams who build and design the attractions. I will say that kind of science and psychology behind queuing, that's decades old at this point. So, we can help contribute to new research on that, but we already know all the tricks. And as you observed, they are being implemented. But we also work with partners in kind of front gate operations or partners in guest services or accessibility or, any kind of element of our business that a guest experiences. We're going to be studying that side of the business. And sometimes there are sides of the business that the guest doesn't interface with directly, but there is some sort of back-end connection, like thinking about the merchandise that we sell in stores and how do we design merchandise that's cool or appealing to a younger generation. I mean, the folks that are doing the merch designing, they're not usually in the stores with the guest, but we can talk to them back in their, secret design room. And then we can talk to the guests out in the merchandise venue. And so that's also part of a pretty traditional kind of mode of doing anthropology, right, is making sure you're engaging with stakeholders along a broad spectrum of sort of the process, right? People at the beginning of the process and people at the end to bring this holistic point of view to life.
So, how do you balance observational research with interviews and like participant engagement?
It's totally depends on the project, right? I mean, what's the research question? Who's asking it? To what end? So we do certain types of projects that are really tactical, right? We've got, let's say, an operator of an attraction out in the park, and they want to know how and when and why people are using some feature of their attraction. Well, we don't necessarily need to ask a guest a lot of questions about that, especially because what people say they do tends to be pretty different from what they actually do. So that might be a case where we design kind of a set of structured observations to do. We go out, we do them over a period of time, and we can report those results back really quickly and make any changes. The operators can make any changes they need to make pretty quickly. But there are also projects where the thing we're exploring is not necessarily a specific research question, but rather some broader, more comprehensive cultural topic. Like I was saying, merchandise, right? We want to design cool merchandise. Well, what does it mean to be cool? What does that actually mean? So hard to think of a way you could observe in a structured way coolness, right? That's a little bit more complex. We got to get into people's beliefs and values and ideologies. So we might use some certain types of interviews or focus groups for that kind of question. But that's also a case where we're actually going back to the academic literature, reading about the sociology of coolness, reading that history, certainly trying to distill it a lot because nobody in the business world wants to read a 20-page literature review. I want to read it, but not everybody else does, which is fair. And then doing that really classic anthropological process of following the breadcrumbs, right? Okay, here's this generative idea from the literature on the sociology of coolness. Is there a way for me to ask a question about that in an interview that's, tactical and focused enough that you're not throwing out some big, crazy concept to a person, something really tangible that they can engage with? And so I think that's one way that this role is quite different from, you mentioned user experience research. And yeah, we've got some overlaps with that, but I think with a lot of UX research, when it's product focused, it's focused on a particular consumer good, like that design of an app or the design of a water bottle or something, right? UX research does use a lot of qualitative methodologies, but it's so much more tactical and focused on a specific thing, right? Or a specific product or consumer good. Sometimes our work is not that focused. And so we have to be open to shifting and adapting the methods we use while we're in the middle of using them, right? And being reactive in that way. And, there are often external pressures like deadlines. We sometimes don't get to the end of a road that we want to before our stakeholder needs the information. And then we say, here's what we know, here's what we have, here's all the questions that are still have to be answered. But when we're lucky, we do get the luxury of a nice long time to really sift through, explore lots of different ways of gathering data about a problem, and then find a way to tie them all together in a nice little story.
Do you ever have to work on multiple projects at the same time, or is it just
Well,
one?
I wish. No, all the time, all the time. And that's because, right, I mean, I mentioned these kind of really tactical, guest-focused research questions that our operators come to us with. The operators are the people that are opening the park gates every day, getting people on and off attractions safely, bringing them food. We want to answer those questions as quickly as we can because it's a little bit more immediate, right? The need is a little bit more immediate. We have thousands and thousands of people coming into our parks every day. That's a low number, right? Thousands and thousands. It's like tens of thousands. We want to do everything we can to make sure the experience they're having is super excellent and super awesome. And so those kinds of projects we tend to jump on pretty quickly and move quickly with. But that doesn't mean the business need to explore those kind of juicier cultural concepts goes away, right? It just means you don't need the answer to what it means to be cool right now, but this attraction operator does need to know as soon as possible whether people are engaging with this new part of the attraction in the way that was intended. That's a lot more critical. So it's all about balancing urgency and needs in that sense. There's definitely no one project at a time over here. We're too busy. There's too many questions, too many things to do.
Do you guys ever have to address like ethical considerations when you're doing ethnographic work with the visitors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a given in a lot of any kind of research you're doing with human beings, right? You want to make sure that you're abiding by broader ethical norms in research. It's different doing this sort of work in the corporate world because we're not beholden to like an institutional review board like you might be if you were a researcher at a university. But nevertheless, we want to do right by the people who participate in our research. And that means a lot of different things, right? When we're doing structured observations, we're not going to interrupt every single person and ask them to sign a consent form. It's disruptive for a variety of reasons. And when you come into a theme park, you might buy into the idea that team members and employees are paying attention to you for a variety of different reasons. Safety reasons, to be friendly and nice, and maybe someone like me who is, watching what you're doing for research purposes. When we have more in-depth conversations with people through focus groups or interviews, we're a little bit more detailed in the kind of ethical and consent gaining process, which makes sense, right? Because we're using their words that they're telling us directly and sharing their stories with us. We have a lot more identifying information about them. So in those cases, we do spend a little bit more time on that. But I would say, yeah, to answer your question more succinctly, of course, anytime you're doing research on human beings, you should be paying attention to that. That's any good researcher.
Yeah. What kind of challenges do you encounter doing research in such a busy and kind of hectic environment?
Yeah. I mean, this is a lot, right? There are practical challenges when we're doing research in the field. A lot of the times our work brings us like physically out into the theme parks, and that's super fun. But when you want to stop and we do a lot of quick sort of 5 to 10 minute interviews with guests. We might stop someone, ask them if they have the time and if they're willing on a range of different topics. Getting good audio quality is a huge challenge. We did one project where the intercept site was right next to, actually right underneath a roller coaster. So you've got a recorder in someone's face and they're talking to you and you hear on the recording every few minutes, "Wah!" just this noise of people screaming going by you at regular intervals because the roller coaster is running. Or if we're talking to guests inside a retail venue, right? You think even if you go into a mall, usually they're playing background music. It makes the experience more pleasant, but it makes the recording very challenging to listen to. So you have practical kind of material challenges like that. There's also the broader challenge of explaining to our internal partners and stakeholders, what is this kind of research and how do we interpret the results, right? Surveys are a lot more complicated, a lot harder to do well than people give them credit for. But on some level, you give someone a pie chart or a bar graph and it's easier to read. I actually don't think it's easier to read, but people feel that they understand it more than kind of a synthesized narrative of people's experiences where I'm interspersing direct quotes from people or showing videos or just in general using this really anthropological process of knitting together a bunch of different data sources to talk about my findings in a narrative fashion, to do this sort of storytelling. Now, obviously, I mean, the organization hired me where the ethnographic team has been growing for the last couple of years. So obviously they've bought into it to some degree, but there is always, a little bit of explanatory work that you have to do to help people understand how do you use this sort of qualitative data? What assumptions can you make about it that you can't make about surveys and vice versa, right? We can get really rich, nuanced information. But whether you want to bank on that being true for the thousands of people you can contact through a survey, there I might say pause. Let's pull in the quantitative team and find ways to measure this in a different fashion. So that sort of give and take, and really we take on in those cases a bit of an educator role in the organization to kind of explain data literacy in a very core way, right? Not just about ethnographic approaches, but about other kinds of quantitative, other sorts of social science approaches. And so that's the bigger, more conceptual challenge, is making sure people understand what this type of data means, how to use it responsibly, and how to ask us good questions for more research projects to do in the future.
Yeah, there are a lot of companies that don't really understand the value of qualitative data because they're like, if it's not quantitative, I can't measure it. So how does it do me any good? But that's what a lot of anthropologists do, is they do qualitative data. So like you said, having to explain its importance and that kind of stuff sometimes can be a little frustrating, especially when you have to explain it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a lot more well known now than it was in previous years where it just wasn't used as much.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's still quite rare to see a role like mine with the word ethnographic in the title. But I have been, in the last few years since I've been in this position, I've been able to attend quite a few market research conferences. Market research, consumer insights, it's a lot of different, some people might argue there's shades of difference there, and there probably is. But I think they all kind of live in the same family of corporate or industry research on consumers or guests or visitors, or however you want to call this group of people who are spending money on your product, right? And just in the last couple of years, I've seen a pretty, for me, notable increase in how many corporate research projects talk about the use of ethnography, talk about the use of participant observation as methods, right? And I think there's a lot of space for anthropologists in this world to come in and, make sure those ethnographic methods are really being used rigorously and being used in a way that is aligned with the expectations that we set in the social sciences with some reasonable flexibility, right? I mean, it's just not realistic to ask anybody in the corporate world, can I do a year-long participant observation-based ethnography? It's just, nobody's got the time or money for that. And also the questions don't necessarily require that level of depth. When you're an academic asking research questions, your research questions are kind of supposed to be at the cutting, bleeding edge of human knowledge. So the questions do get really niche and nuanced and specific. And so you might need a year or more, sometimes anthropologists are in the field, to tease all that apart. It's rare that you need that level of time depth in a project on this side. But yeah, I mean, as I was saying, you hear those words as methods being used by market researchers and consumer insights professionals more and more. And so I personally there are a lot of anthropologists in this space, I've also learned, to my delight and surprise. But I think there's just a lot of room for more of us over here because people are saying those words, and we need anthropologists in there to make sure the words are being used honorably and correctly.
Yeah. So it kind of led you into this career path, like previous experiences, schooling, work?
Oh, yes. Well, I had envisioned myself from a very early age as a professor. I was on the academic track. The story I like to tell is that, when I was 18, first semester, freshman year of college, I took an amazing linguistics class, an amazing professor, and I basically said, cool, how do I be like you when I grow up? That's what I want to do. And I put myself on that track, and I started getting involved with research as an undergrad. I went straight into a PhD program. I love that, we talked about kind of cutting, bleeding edge of human knowledge, right? I loved being in that space, and I loved being able to ask really complex, esoteric questions. I loved being really engaged with the literature, kind of the new research that was coming out. I also really loved teaching. I had a grand old time doing that. And I did, when I finished my PhD, start on that career path. The goal of many people in that realm is to secure a tenure-track position. My first position was non-tenure track, but it was at a really great university and a great department with awesome colleagues and amazing students, brilliant students. So I was just kind of chilling on that path, I was chilling there. I was applying for other positions. I was waiting for the tenure-track job to come through. But as you're probably aware, the academic job market is tight and brutal, especially when you're for everyone. I don't think this is especially true, actually. But for me, as a linguistic anthropologist, that's a pretty narrow subfield already. So, the number of jobs that come out that I'm qualified for every year are a tiny pool. And it's a tiny pool that all my friends are applying for the same jobs as well. So it's just tight. It's a tricky game for a variety of reasons. And, we don't need to get into the history or the politics of why that is. But I was just sort of at a point where I thought, okay, I'd like for the tenure-track job to come through. It'd be great if it came through. And that's my goal, but I'm not going to close myself off to other opportunities. So while I was at my first teaching position, I was applying for kind of any job that said the word qualitative research in it. I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just doing that thing where you throw spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks. And so I didn't feel a big loss, but I didn't get any callbacks or interview invitations or anything like that. But one day I saw this job, manager of ethnographic research. And actually I didn't see it. It was a friend of a friend who vaguely knew about my research topic, my academic research, which was on media fandom and pop culture. And she said, man, I don't know your work very well, but it seems like working at this company would kind of be a fit for you topic-wise. And you're an anthropologist, so ethnographic research, that's your bread and butter. And I applied thinking, this is hilarious. Ethnographic research at the theme park, they're never going to call me because I have no corporate work experience, but I gotta throw something in the hat there. What a hoot. And then, it was a hoot the next week when I had their HR representative call me and start the process, and later found out that, in fact, there are several PhD anthropologists on the team here. There's people with a lot of different academic backgrounds. And it's through that interview process that I really started to get serious about thinking, all right, well, I could keep hanging on to my teaching contract and hope that the tenure-track job comes through, but it might not. And then I'd have to make a switch. I'd have to make a career switch anyway. Or I could take the leap now for this position that is aligned with my methodological training. It's aligned with the topical focus of my research. And all the people on the team seem really cool. They have similar backgrounds to me in terms of their academic training. What would happen if I took the leap now? Wasn't part of the plan, wasn't necessarily the goal to be working in a theme park or in market research or anything like that. But it was one of those right place, right time sort of opportunities. So when the offer came through, I decided, well, I'm going to change my entire life plan. I had planned since age 18 to be a professor. Now I'm going to do whatever this is. That again, as I told you before, nobody really knew, right? We knew we wanted to grow the ethnographic research program here because my director had really good success with the first big qualitative project she launched, and the organization wanted more of it. That's awesome. So she didn't know what I was going to do. She did. I'm being dramatic. I didn't know what I was going to do. There was a lot of open questions, but I thought if I'm going to make this switch, knowing what the job market is like in academia, if I'm going to make this switch at any point, there really isn't a more perfect role or position for me. So I better take this one now and see what happens. And luckily, it was a great decision because I'm having a grand old time. And as we've been discussing, I do get to, some of this is an effect of the fact that I work with a lot of anthropologists and the role was designed to be quite social scientific. But I do feel like I get to use my training in a really direct way all the time, which is lucky. And I think still a little bit unusual, but maybe the more we see market researchers throw around words like ethnography and participant observation, maybe that won't be untrue or unusual rather for so long. That's what brought me here. Luck, chance, willingness to jump off the deep end and try something totally different than I had hoped and planned to do, but no regrets. Having a grand old time over here.
Yeah, some individuals I know, they're kind of set on their track of I want to do this. And it's almost when you're on those kind of tracks, you put these blinders on to anything else that could come up on the side, even though they might be really great opportunities. So I think that's also something that anthropologists have a skill set within themselves, is being open and willing to taking those blinders off and being like, this is the track that I want. But if something else comes along that might fall within, for what happened with you, then maybe that opportunity is presented to me for a reason. And I think that's something that a lot of individuals kind of need to consider. Because for me, myself, I don't really know what I want to do, but I'm kind of set on this track of, whatever job I get, I want it to allow me to travel frequently and keep me busy, because I don't enjoy jobs where I kind of just sit there and be like, okay, I finished all my work in an hour. Now what do I do for the next 6 or 7 hours? But being open to all these different changes of oh, well, why don't you go back to school and get this degree? It might open up a lot more opportunities for you. And it's well, I don't want to go back to school, but if it'll give me an opportunity to maybe broaden my job scope a little bit, then maybe it's worth taking the risk. But speaking of school, What was your grad school experience like, and do you have any advice for prospective students?
Yes, I haven't thought about prospective students in quite a long time. I mean, grad school was the right decision for me, but partly because I wasn't gonna do anything else, you know? Whenever I graduated from college, I was dead set on PhD program. I look back and I think I probably could have benefited from a couple of years off, even just taking working at a restaurant or working retail for a couple years, not to do anything dramatic, but just because it's a little intense to go straight from undergrad into a PhD program. It's a lot. So there were moments when it was overwhelming and intense. And if I could go back but actually, I don't know. I was going to say if I could go back and course correct, I would convince my younger self, like, first piece of advice, take some time off between undergrad and grad school. Grad school's not going anywhere. But on the other hand, I know I wouldn't have listened. So I don't know. For anybody that's considering it, especially if you are an undergrad right now, I'd take a beat if you can. There are sometimes, other factors like if you have a really good funding offer from a PhD program, I don't know, take it. The financial kind of considerations are real and they shouldn't be left out of that. But I think regardless of whether and when you might decide to enter a graduate program, you have to, not have those blinders on. Have a lot of openness to a lot of different paths that result from that degree, including doing something totally different from the degree, right? There's the material, there's the financial concerns, but it's not even about that. It's more about what expectations are you setting up for yourself and how are you going to feel if those expectations don't materialize, right? So I'm not the kind of person who thinks, you should only go to graduate school in really particular circumstances. If you're going to graduate school and you think the only good result of this is that I get a tenure-track job as faculty at a university, I would probably recommend pausing and having some deep thoughts, deep conversations with yourself before you jump in there. But I also don't think the reason needs to be really tactical, right? You don't have to have a clear-cut plan of if I don't get a tenure-track job, then I'm going to become a market research professional, and I'm also going to do all these things, X, Y, and Z, to professionalize in other ways. You should be open to those opportunities and seek them out throughout your studies. But I think it's perfectly fine to do graduate degrees just because you're curious, just because you want to deepen your kind of intellectual mastery over a topic. I don't think there's anything wrong with education for education's sake. I think you got to be smart about the finances, right? So going into a lot of debt for a degree you're getting just for fun, probably not the move, right? But getting accepted to a PhD program where you're funded, you have funding opportunities, where you're spending some of the time doing your coursework and doing your research, but also looking for internships or looking for, summer training opportunities where you can get experience in other industries, other areas of work. That's really smart. And then if at the end of your PhD, you leave academia entirely and you pursue one of those little threads that you developed by external outside training, that's awesome. The PhD wasn't a waste at all. I think education is valuable for its own sake. And if that's your motivation, that's fantastic. But to steal your blinders metaphor, I think it's critical, especially now in 2025, you go into that training and graduate experience with the kind of forethought and planning to be both fully getting everything you can out of your in-depth theoretical and methodological training, and also looking for other opportunities to professionalize in different ways. Lots of summer internships, lots of kind of university internal work. When I was in my last couple of years of grad school, I got a part-time position working in one of the grants offices, so I'm not really doing anything related to that, but it was a really interesting way to learn more about university finances and university budgets and talk to a bunch of different stakeholders across the university. So that was a great opportunity for me. Things like that, right? Where you're not just solely focused on and subsumed by your topic or your disciplinary focus. You really have to be smart about finding ways for yourself to just develop other sets of experiences. And I say that last point, I'll just harp on that for one more second. You do have to be motivated to find those opportunities for yourself. I hope that this is changing, but in my experience, the faculty in my graduate program were very encouraging and open to students pursuing non-academic career paths with their degrees, but they don't know how always to give that practical support. They'll cheer you on. They'll be amazing cheerleaders. The faculty in my program, I think, unfortunately, there's still a bit of you can still get some negative opinions, unfortunately, from career academics about industry work. That's silly. I would ignore that. But even your staunchest cheerleader, they're professors. They probably only know the academic path. And so they can't realistically give you good advice about where to find these internships or where to find these kind of alternative professionalization kind of training opportunities. And so this is the other piece of advice I would give to people interested in graduate school. Go to grad school. Get deep and messy in the hardcore theoretical edge of the topic or discipline you're passionate about. But you also have to have the self-motivation and the self-discipline to simultaneously look for, apply for, engage with, and get something out of those internships, other kinds of jobs, other modes of training, and be your own self-advocate to avail yourself of those opportunities. Your professors will cheer you on, but they will not know how to guide you in that way. This is fine. That's just not what they're experienced in. So you have to take it upon yourself to do that. And I think that can get you amazing results from a graduate program, right? You get the deep, rich intellectual life that is what I think back on most fondly from my experience in grad school, being able to read deeply, have deep discussions, challenge ideas, debate. That was amazing. I miss that. But you can't just do that. You also have to be thinking about, okay, the academic path doesn't work out. There's not enough jobs for everyone. What other tools am I going to add to my toolkit and have on my resume if I need to pivot? If I want to pivot, right? It may not be about need. You may just decide you may have a great experience in graduate school and through that experience learn, boy, I don't want to be a professor. Glad I know that. I have this rich training. I have this fancy degree. That's amazing. That's not time wasted. But what were you doing in the meantime to gain other experiences and kind of forms of training that will help you explore other industries?
Yeah, and I can kind of relate to that in the way of like undergraduate school is I just did school and work. I didn't do anything on campus. I didn't participate in events. If I got an internship, it was pretty much like the easiest one that I could find that would qualify for the credit. And in the end, it kind of hurt me a little bit, especially when looking for jobs, is like when you're answering those survey questions during a job questionnaire of like, oh, what accomplishments do you have? Or what internship experience do you have? Or anything like that. I'm like, crap, I have none. And so this time around with going back to school, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get involved on campus. I'm going to go to events and I'll talk to my professors and get internships and whatever so I can broaden my skill set and my resume skill set. Because a lot of places these days are, what is your experience? And that's where it kills a lot of people.
Totally. I think especially too when you have a degree like anthropology that we know as anthropologists that is like anything that involves human beings could use an anthropologist, which means virtually any job in the world, hypothetically, right? But then you're relying on a hiring manager knowing what the word anthropology means, having enough of that background to do themselves the translation of, okay, you got an anthropology degree. I can see it fitting in here. I can roughly kind of estimate what those skills might be. Unfortunately, anthropology as a discipline is not great at public education. And I've seen some efforts within the American Anthropological Association for to be better at that. We need the public to understand, to just in the same way a public doesn't need to know theoretical physics to understand what a physicist might know. We need that same level of knowledge for anthropologists, right? And so if you don't have a set of experiences or trainings or skill sets that you can put on a resume that makes that clear, you're putting it on the hiring manager. You're rolling the dice that they know what anthropology means and know that that degree title confers a certain set of skills, background, training. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you there. I also think in the current work environment, it used to be the case, allegedly, I was never in this job market, so I don't actually know if it's true, but the story goes that you just needed the college degree. Didn't really matter what it was in, but if you have the college degree, that communicated all it needed to communicate to a hiring manager for an entry-level job in many different kinds of industries. Whether or not that was actually the case then, it's certainly not the case now, right? It's not enough. And it's not enough for a variety of reasons, but that means that you do yourself a disservice if you're not able to articulate in really tangible material ways what an anthropology degree means. So whether that's through other kinds of training, other kinds of experiences, ways you can make those skills manifest for a hiring manager beyond just saying, I got the degree, I got the piece of paper, which is still a huge accomplishment, by the way. That's amazing. But we can't expect a hiring manager who may have no background in the social sciences to look at the word anthropology on a resume and have any flippin' clue what they're supposed to do with that. You got to make it more tactical for them. So I think exploring all these different venues, all these different strategies for making those skills more manifest in the resume is critical and a very smart move. So props to you for that.
Thank you. Now, do you feel that obtaining an anthropology degree has kind of broadened your perspective and view on the world?
Yeah, but it's not the degree itself, right? It's the books I read, the people that I got a chance to talk to, the studies that I learned about. A degree facilitates those things, right? The odds of any old person picking up some kind of ethnography from the local bookstore and reading it for fun, slower. But if I have to do it for a class, I'm definitely going to do it. Now I have a different set of training. So now I do read ethnographies for fun, of course. And it's actually great being in the corporate world because I have so much more free time and I can do that. And I can read ethnographies that have nothing to do with my own research. It's actually pretty fun. So I guess, yeah, yes and no. I don't know that I would have had the self-discipline to bring myself to learn about those things without the structure of a traditional degree program. But I don't think I think you can get that through a lot of different ways, right? You can read the books, you can read the theory without stepping foot in a classroom, without having the piece of paper. You can gain the experience and knowledge of ethnographic fieldwork. I did my fieldwork in Argentina. I could have learned a lot of similar stuff by going to live in Argentina for some other reason, right? It didn't have to be anthropology motivated. What I got out of the degree and the graduate study was not kind of world perspective shifting. It was more really rigorous training on how to theorize and how to explore a problem through a lot of different avenues, how to connect the dots between different studies and bring them to bear on my own that might on the surface seem to be totally unrelated. But the experience with having my perspective on the world shifted or broadened, I get that from talking to people, which is bread and butter anthropological methodology, right? I get that from talking to human beings out in the world. I get that from reading deeply about a lot of different backgrounds, cultures, groups, perspectives, fiction and nonfiction too. So I think I'm talking about reading ethnographies, but I think there's a lot to be learned about the world through, reading interesting novels and consuming them critically. So it's maybe not a satisfactory answer to your question. I think the discipline of anthropology has a lot of kind of pathways built into it that lend themselves to that sort of mind expanding, perspective expanding experience and transformation. But I don't think it's unique to an anthropology degree. I think you can get that in a lot of different ways from a lot of different sources. And what I would attribute to the anthropology degree is this kind of really unique training in critical thinking, cross-cultural thinking, holistic understanding of a perspective of a problem, being able to see one thing from a bunch of different angles. That's what I give the degree.
Okay, cool. Now, before we get into our final 4 questions, is there anything that we haven't discussed yet today that you would like to let the listeners know about or bring up?
Oof, that's the big question. No, there's so much you could possibly say about the kind of work that I do and the way that anthropology fits into it. But it's as I said, anthropology is relevant to any kind of industry or career where human beings are, which is virtually everywhere. So the ways that's going to manifest is just going to be so unique to each position and each role. But yeah, I guess I'll say if you're an anthropologist looking for a non-academic career path to hang your hat in, then consumer insights and market research is one option. There you go.
Yeah. So my first question to you is, what is the best piece of advice that you would offer to someone who is interested in getting into career research or insights in ethnographic research?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll give you the advice I wish somebody had given me, which I hate to give because I'm an anthropologist. I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm not a numbers girly, but the numbers are important. And I wish that somebody had strongly suggested to me, again, would I have listened? No. But I wish that somebody had strongly suggested to me that even if you want to be a professional qualitative researcher in whatever sort of industry, having the ability to understand and talk about and do some of the quantitative stuff is very, very important. And there's practical and there's kind of broader reasons for that. The practical stuff is that in most industries, the numbers matter a lot. And people are still developing a literacy in what qualitative data means and how it can be used. So in order to make that conversation convincing, it's often good to have the number stuff on your side to say, here's what I know about all this quantitative work. And because I have this knowledge of this, I can explain to you super clearly why this quantitative stuff won't get you the answers you want and why you should let me go do the qual instead. So even if you see yourself as an anthropologist, as a qualitative researcher, the other practical thing is that entry-level roles for qualitative research are quite rare. It's much more common to find entry-level quant analysis roles that then might have a qualitative component built into that. And hey, once you get your foot in the door, then you become an advocate and an evangelist in the organization for, let's build up the qual program. And maybe I'll spearhead that because I have this training. Then you're there, you can teach the HR manager what anthropology means and what value it adds. But yeah, my biggest piece of advice is like, don't skimp out on the stats classes. Take all the stats classes, take all the survey design, survey methodology classes. That is still, and for good reason, again, it's a pretty critical piece of currency that you have. And maybe things will change. We get more anthropologists in here and we kind of see qual teams that have those entry-level pathways from the ground up. But if you want to jump in at a low level, you need the quant chops on some level. So take the stats class. Take multiple if you can. For me, that would be brutal. And I'm very grateful to our quant team here who does all that hard work. But if I could convince my past self and I could get her to be less stubborn, I would definitely make sure she was doing that sort of cross-training.
Now, what changes would you wish to see in the industry that you work in?
It's another great question. Well, I think, so I mentioned that I had been to some of these market research conferences in the last couple years. I think, and I've been hearing the word ethnography, words like participant observation and people's methodological descriptions. I think that's great. I want to see that held to a high standard. I want to see that expand in the industry, and I want to see people saying ethnography, saying participant observation, and really having the kind of full rigor and intensity of traditional anthropological ethnographic research behind that, right? And again, that doesn't mean I want everybody in market research doing year-long, in-home ethnographic studies. That's not feasible or necessary for a lot of different reasons. But on the flip side, I want to hear less, we did an ethnography, and what's meant is we did a week of hour-long interviews with people. That doesn't feel ethnographic, right, properly to me, which involves kind of like a deeper, richer, more in-depth exploration of a particular group or setting or cultural context. So, and for that, we need more anthropologists to join this industry. So there's my invitation again, right? I want to see this world continue to develop its use of qualitative methodologies like ethnography. And I want it to be as rigorous and as awe-inspiring as the fancy regression models that the statisticians are doing.
Yeah. Now, for everyone's favorite question, what do you just absolutely love about your job?
The people. A classic anthropology answer, right? The people, I'm mostly talking about my team. I have a really cool team. They all have a bunch of we've got anthropologists, we got linguists, we got political scientists, we've got psychologists. We have all this really diverse social science training and background. So I sometimes say like our team meetings sometimes feel like it's a weird little think tank of really smart people. I love that. I think it's kind of unusual in this sort of industry world too. So I feel really lucky about that. But, people in the sense of I get to spend a lot of time having interesting conversations with interesting people who come to theme parks, who are spending their vacation time and their vacation money here and often defy expectations of what I might expect theme park enthusiasts to be like. That's really cool. So I give number one place to the people, on my team and the people that I talk to. Is it great to be able to get on a roller coaster on your lunch break? Yes, that is also awesome. It is definitely a job perk. That rules too.
Do you get to skip the lines or do you have to wait in line?
No, I'm waiting. I'm here about the guest perspective. I really want to know what it's like for everyone. So there's no special privileges here. Definitely if you're like a really fancy executive, they'll let you in. But I'm toughing it out with the rest of y'all.
And it can be tough sometimes, especially with those lines where you're like, oh, we're almost there. And then they're like, oh, here's one more big room you have to go through. And you're like,
well, there's a lot of great work out there about the psychology of queuing. So anybody who's interested in those topics, look up that work. They'll teach you a lot about kind of what are the decisions that go into that and how that helps or doesn't help the guest experience.
Yeah. So where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
Well, I am on LinkedIn. It's kind of the only social media I'm really on at the moment. So you can look up my name there, and I'm happy to connect. Happy to, when I have the time, do informal, meet and greets with people. So don't be shy. Feel free to reach out. Or if you don't want to do a meet and greet, you can always just DM me a question, and I like to try to answer that. So I'd encourage people to find me there first.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. And I had a great time talking with you about all things theme parks and anthropology and research. I had a great time. Thank you.
Likewise, me too. This is a great combo.
Well, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
All right, and thanks, and bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show is produced by me and is distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, Leah Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's intern Fiona for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Until next time.